Sir, before him.
Then you can say whatever you want.
Yeah.
Recording in progress.
I'd like to call this month's meeting to order. First order of business is approval of minutes, or do we have to do attendance?
We have no one appearing by
Okay.
Zoom today.
Just making sure.
We don't need to roll call.
Okay. So approval of minutes. You had a copy in your packet, was submitted to you last week. Anybody have any changes or corrections? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Mr. Goble?
Aye.
Mr. Horvath?
Aye.
And Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
There, okay, why don't we go to the economic development area update?
Yep.
All right. Stacy, yep. Open up that. As always in your packet, you will find the list of transactions for the previous month as well as account balances. We did receive some funds as a reimbursement from expenditures against the GM bond that we'll need to appropriate. And in this case, we are putting them in the accounts to make our first debt service payment on those bonds. So could you click on that PowerPoint one more time, please? Oh, that's not working.
Well, just keep going.
We also received the settlements from the from the June taxes, the spring taxes. So you can see on this chart how the receipts per economic development area compare to previous dates of allocations. If you get the next slide, you can also see here the actual breakdown of what those numbers are. Next slide. In New Carlisle Economic Development Area number 1, slide. We have a cash balance of $2,858,322.02 with current open POs of $613,155.91. That includes, the cash balance does include the $449,237 we got in reimbursements. And we are expecting in the December disbursement to bring in another $930,000, making total available for this year a little over $3.1 million. Slide. Today we are asking you to appropriate $499,000 from reimbursements, or $499,237.94. That also includes the $50,000 payment from the Kankakee Yellow River Basin Commission from the agreement that you passed at the last meeting. So $50,000 going into consultants and contractual to go for that 2D study on the Yellow Kankakee River, and $202,000 for lease rentals, and remaining $247,000 to reimburse back into economic development where that money was spent from. So that, again, is a $499,237 appropriation. Next slide. In New Carlisle Economic Development Area number 2, and cash balance of about $3.2 million with current open POs of about $1 million, and that does include the $764,000 we got in bond reimbursements, and expecting about $1.2 million in the December disbursement from taxes. So total available about $3.4 million, and needing to appropriate then, on the next slide, a total of $841,500 into lease rentals. And then in the GM Samsung 24 A and B debt service fund, need to appropriate $909,559. That is coming from those two funds we just appropriated. So the way that the bond payments work is we pay a lease payment from the TIF to the authority, and then the authority makes the bond payment.
Okay. All right, thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Fotia?
No, thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Okay. Hearing none, is there a motion to approve Resolution 2024-12?
So moved.
Second.
Again, any questions, conversation? Hearing none?
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Mr. Gobel?
Aye.
Mr. Horvath?
Aye.
And Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Frank, are you doing this next one, the pictometry?
Oh, yes. Before you is an amendment to the Eagle View Pictometry Master Services Agreement. You remember last year after the 6-month flight, they did a 3D mesh work with that. This is amending it to do that work again for the most recent flight. Like last time, the cost is $12,000 for this work. And staff respectfully requests your approval.
Same guy. Okay. Is that just for, are we going to be doing this once a year or every 6 months going forward?
This is, there was such a dramatic difference between the first set of aerials that was done. They've got some new technology. As part of that new technology, we said, well, let's take the newest aerial we have, put it into the system, and so this is the last time, and until we find, that everything comes together and
Okay,
works
because I
well.
thought our contract was for several years going forward.
So-
So the question was, were we going to have the same
Yeah.
service?
Yeah, so we did an aerial contract and this 3D mesh, and they've upgraded the 3D mesh, and so we just want the newest aerial set in the system.
Okay. Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion or questions? Hearing none, Mr. Garrett?
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Mr. Gobel?
Aye.
Mr. Horvath?
Aye.
And Mr. Jordan?
Yes?
Motion carries.
Frank is your person on.
All right. Yep.
Okay. So the next two items are very interrelated. They both are related to water and sewer out in the New Carlisle area. So the first before you is the Town of New Carlisle memorandum, and so that's the document that was circulated last night called Agreement Concerning Water Service and Related Matters. This is agreement between the Town of New Carlisle, the Redevelopment Commission, and the Board of Commissioners. This is an agreement that probably should have been in place 25 years ago after the original water treatment plant was built. There was a water treatment plant that was built as part of Tech and Coat. It was given ultimately to the town, but there was really never a legal agreement, legal mechanism between the parties. So this agreement covers both plants, the Cliffs plant, the original Tech and Coat plant, as well as the SJEC water plant that was built as part of the Energy Center project. This project defines a service area, and there's a map of the service area as Exhibit A. So it's not only the IEC area, but it also is the town, and it also is a larger area. Service area is a larger area that could be serviced by water in the area. Again, this agreement's specific to water. The parties have been working on this agreement for a number of months, and so we're excited to be able to get to this point. The goal of this agreement is to take the actual existing users, take future users, and then take all the empirical data that we've done with Peerless Midwest and really put some good understanding to the growth of the water treatment plants and what the potential is of the plants, and then try to put some practical limits as far as how much can be taken out of the aquifer for development in the area. In recital H, it talks about, and we'll talk further about this later, but in Exhibit H, our goal is to take no more than 24 million gallons of water per day out of the aquifer. The aquifer itself can produce and has a recharge value of about 44 million gallons per day. So providing a 20 million gallon safe yield that's protected is part of the future development of the area. And again, just because we're developing water systems that could use up to 24 million gallons a day doesn't mean immediately we're doing that. So it's a progressive scale up of the water systems. Throughout the agreement, this, again, it's an agreement between the bodies. So the town's responsibility is, as it has been, to manage the water system. So everything from managing the water treatment plants to managing the billings related to that and all the other things related. The town also will have the responsibility to set rates and charges, which is what it does today. As part of this agreement, the county and the redevelopment commission would be not only funding the existing improvements, then also work to help fund future improvements in coordination with the town and the water systems. Once we make the improvements to the existing water system, whether it's to the water treatment plant, putting new pipes in the ground, along Fillmore Road or some of the other places, and even going back as far as the water lines that were built as part of the Energy Center, up Walnut, along US 20 and down to Smilax, all those pipes and pieces and parts will be turned over to the city or the town for their ownership. This is a agreement that, again, it's a long-term agreement. It's a big picture agreement. There's a requirement that there's a 5-year review of rates by the town, so that, again, the town is keeping its rate system current with its user base, creation of a depreciation fund. So, again, it's nice to build all the new systems, but at some point you've got to pay for them and replacement and repair and upgrades. So there's a mechanism to put together a depreciation fund from water rate users into that fund. Again, we have a commitment to help with cost as it relates to construction of these projects. As you get back to page 7, the county is responsible for hiring an engineer that's coordinated with the town to do these design projects. In particular, we're using DLZ to do the water system improvements in this area. We're also using Donahue and Associates and then some other partners as we look at upgrades to the Cleveland Cliffs plant. One provision, section 4.7, I would note, as the SJEC water treatment plant was originally built for the future growth of the SJEC project, so phase 1, phase 2, we are taking potential capacity away from phase 2 of that SJEC project to use for other users. Again, it's not being used. There's a potential that SJEC phase 2 never gets built, but in the event that it does, we would have a requirement, the redevelopment commission, would have a requirement to help replace that water use capacity within that 24 million gallon development. So we would have responsibilities there. So that's just an important provision to note. So if we skip to page 9, section 5.2, there's a provision for professional fees. The redevelopment commission, as part of this agreement, would be responsible for paying up to $300,000. We would call them catch-up fees to a large degree. So for a period of years, a lot of the rates and documents and things like that were stale to a large degree. So these fees, which have to be monitored, have to have receipts provided, things like that, so that we can do reimbursements or pay, would be a repayment to the town for expenses to a point to get them caught up so that they have all of the fee rate structures, processes, procedures, things like that in place, and again, up to a $300,000 amount. And then, again, memorialized in this agreement is section 6.1, where we memorialize that it would be a capacity up to 24 million gallons per day is the cap. In the event that we have additional projects come in, say there's additional growth somewhere that requires additional water, whether it's out of one of those 2 existing water treatment plants or a third water treatment plant has to be created that would exceed us above 24 million gallons a day, there would have to be agreement between the parties, additional scientific studies, likely using Peerless Midwest to do those studies to show that additional take out of the aquifer wouldn't create capacity limit issues, things like that. 6.3, provision 6.3 on page 11, the RDC would agree not to use any TIF revenues to support multifamily housing in the town's municipal limits without the approval of the town. So if there was an opportunity for a partnership on the project, it would have to have the town's consent. 6.4 says that any opportunity to expand the requirements, conditions, provisions within the IC core development overlay. We would look to do that if appropriate. And then 6.5 is a provision on annexation that basically sets terms and conditions on how the town could annex and how that town's annexation would mesh and work with the existing New Carlisle Economic Development Area. Within the agreement, so really then kind of the next piece, and this dovetails to the other agreement, is a reimbursement fee. So as we make these improvements, and then ultimately as the town takes over the network, there's a reimbursement fee for expenses that the redevelopment commission has had making these improvements. So there's a provision where there's an allocation of cost that as new users come into the line, a equivalent development unit or dwelling unit provision or an EDU is calculated against any new user. And that EDU provision then sets a value, and that value, each EDU has a value of $2,099.80, which is a mathematical equation captured in section 8.1 that shows how much was spent on improvements, how much the value of that is. So then any user would be required to pay an EDU value. That EDU value is then captured in a fund by the county to be used for reimbursement to AWS. And we'll talk about that as part of a separate agreement. Those reimbursement fees come back to the county on a structured basis for no more than a period of 10 years or until the costs are paid off with the AWS agreement. So there's a tie-in to that agreement. And then again, I would note Exhibit A is the service area, the redlined area would be what we would call the New Carlisle service territory. The areas in which the county gets its reimbursement, though, are limited to the areas shaded in yellow. So it's a much smaller area, more tied directly to the industrial users. So again, if new single-family residential housing was going to be built in New Carlisle, those would not be subject to the EDU. The EDUs would only be tied to suppliers or other users within the economic development area. I would also note that those EDU requirement payments do not get tied to AWS, the SBN 100 or 200 project, or the GM project. So those are outside of the value or the piece of that reimbursement. You will notice that there is no documentation related to Exhibits B and C. Those documents are coming, and so what we'd ask you to do is approve this agreement subject to finalization of Exhibit B and C. I would note that the town approved this agreement at a special meeting last night, 4-0, I believe. So they had 4 members present when they voted. And so I would just appreciate your vote on this agreement. And again, we apologize that it came to you so late as it did, but it's just been kind of a work in progress document. Any questions, Phil Garrett would be happy to answer them.
Is there a time sensitivity to this?
Very much so, because the next piece of this, the AWS agreement, so we have to have this agreement in place before we can have the AWS agreement in place. And the AWS agreement then controls reimbursements of payments back to us relative to the expenses we're making to do water and sewer and other improvements in that area.
So, go ahead. So I was trying to keep up while I was reading, so I'm not very good at multitasking. You mentioned multifamily. So this is to support a certain level of multifamily growth. Did that include single-family too?
So the provision against using TIF is specifically targeted to multifamily housing. So if there was and if the town consented, if there was a reason that we partnered with a multifamily project that the town was supportive of, then that consent would be given.
It doesn't preclude, it just says you got to get a special permission.
Correct. And there is no plan or project, in the horizon, but in the event that there is, the town just wants some ability to control the multifamily development within town limits.
Under section 3.3, it says the county RDC are responsible for paying for everything. Is there a cap, an estimate? We haven't done the AWS project yet, but, you know, is their cash flow sufficient? Because I don't know with this agreement how much we would be voting that we would absorb.
Yeah, so I would tell you at this point in time, this agreement covers the existing projects as proposed. That's what Exhibit B will outline, are the projects that are specifically tied to this agreement.
Yeah, and that value is actually delineated in section 8.1,
Yeah.
subpart I.
81,000?
Yes, 81 million.
81
Oh,
million.
yeah, moved it.
Yeah, 1,000 million.
That was a couple deals.
And again, the funding source for that would be other agreements with,
Correct. It's portions of the bonds, which we have already done, as well as through the agreement that's subject to your approval of minutes.
okay.
And what was the life of this agreement? I saw a 10-year somewhere.
So the collection year is 10 years. The agreement, though, has
It's
a
actually
longer.
a 50-year agreement, but
50,
can be
correct.
terminated upon completion of all the requirements within it before that time.
That's right.
I thought 10 was a little short.
Any other questions?
Then this would go to the commissioners, that would be the next step
Yes.
of this?
Yep. And it would go next, the 23rd.
23rd, okay.
Next week. All right. Is there a motion to approve the agreement, subject to completion of the exhibits?
So moved?
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion or questions? No? Mr. Garrett?
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Mr. Goble?
Aye.
Mr. Horvath?
Aye.
And Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Yeah, so this is the big one. So, as part of our, and there's a whole bunch of agreements that will come to you at your next meeting on the 13th. This is one of the pieces, though, that gets us to the other agreements, that gets us to the development agreement, that gets us to some of these other agreements. So this is the water and sewer infrastructure agreement between Amazon Data Services and the county. And again, when I say the county, that's the Redevelopment Commission Board of Commissioners. This is a very robust document that deals with both water and sewer, and deals with the infrastructure related to each. So in the reimbursement table, which is Table 2, the total reimbursable cost to the county for water is $62.7 million. Sanitary sewer infrastructure is $51.3 million. And we'll kind of talk through how that comes together. So on the first page of the terms and conditions, Article 1, 1.1A, basically the way this works is we work together as partners to design the project. The county covers, or the county's doing the design in coordination with ADS or AWS. And then we build it, and then we get reimbursed on a monthly basis for the expenses that we incur. We have monthly reporting requirements to AWS, and there's a very thorough document that covers all the reimbursable pieces, but ADS reimburses the cost. And so there's, in Exhibit 2, a very detailed structure of each reimbursable piece. And that, so for example, as we built the Fillmore water line, so the Fillmore water line goes from Fillmore and Larison all the way back up to the water treatment plant. The value of use of that water line has been split up between GM and AWS, because the water line runs and will service both. So a lot of the reimbursement, if it's not 100% for AWS, it's then divided between GM, other users, and AWS. And so everything's been proportionalized in that fashion. So again, AWS or ADS reimburses for costs. It's on a 30-day basis cycle. So we have the ability then to give them our payments, and they make the payments. So it really helps us from a cash flow standpoint, move, over $100 million worth of investments out in that area. Section 1.3 is kind of the key that then ties backwards into the other agreement. This is what they call the latecomer charge. And so as part of ADS's work, we've identified points in the water or sewer system where the system is being overbuilt. And so there's points where water lines are extended a little farther, sewer lines are maybe a little bigger than they need to be. And so all of those values then have been percentage has been created for where it's overused or overdeveloped and things like that. And so then we have a reimbursement value back to ADS in the amount of $6,999,114 for water, and then $5,343,556 for sewer costs. So approximately 11.4 million that could be charged to or given back to ADS in terms of fees. Now, those fees are figured out based on users and a water perspective over
400,000.
400,000 gallons per day users. So the way the town figures out the difference between a small user and a big user is 400,000 gallons per day. 400,000 gallons per day is a pretty big user. So there's really only a handful in the industrial area right now. So any user that comes in over that value then has to be the costs that are collected from the town, then pay that value. And then sewer is figured out in a very similar fashion. And so then as we collect water, as we collect fees back from sewer, then we pay back AWS or ADS for those costs. Now, in the event that we never have a user that breaks 400,000 gallons per day, there's no payment owed by the county. So it's only when users have certain values that there has to be a payment. So there may be a case where there's no latecomer fee that's ever paid to ADS based on the users that gather in the rest of the park space. Or there may be another big user that comes to the area that creates that value, then has to pay that cost. Either way, the county itself, over the 10-year period of charge for the latecomer fee, has no direct cost or obligation to make that payment. We only have to make that payment if certain threshold points are met. And again, the payment won't start until 7 functional data shells are built on IEC Site 2 or SBWN 100, and latecomer fees won't start payment back to ADS until July 1st, 2027. Now, that date's important because as we do our calculations, if they build 4 data shells this year, they probably won't get assessed in full value until 2025 or 2026, and then payment on taxes would be 2027. So if we don't have enough revenue coming in one way, we've got revenue coming in another, so we've got cost covered. And so again, we're not out cost as we move forward with the process. At your next meeting, we've got a full presentation on cost and values of what the TIF will produce and things like that. So some of those values will make a little bit more sense. The other piece of this, though, is the 10-year period for the latecomer charge starts January 1st, 2025, expires December 31st, 2034. So even though we don't have to start making payments until 2027, the actual collection period for reimbursement would actually start as of the first of this next year. GM, AWS, this first phase of AWS, wouldn't be required to pay latecomer fees into the project. Again, it's a pretty lawyered document, and I say that everybody really did a great job working together. So the next several pages are terms and conditions, definitions, and then again, when you get back to Exhibit 1, that's the form of the monthly report that has to be presented for as part of the payment process. Exhibit 2 details all of the projects, date of operation, when those either have to be completed or when they're going to be bid, so you can kind of see the schedule over the next several years, when those things will have to be done. Exhibit 2 also, again, memorializes that about 62.7 million or 51.3 million of sewer work is going to be done. That together roughly is $114 million worth of improvements that will be made in the IEC that AWS or ADS will be paying for as part of these projects for their development scale. The last thing that's important to note, and again, this doesn't have page numbers, so The last part of Exhibit 2.4, road restoration work will be paid under a separate agreement as we define and determine all the road work that has to be done. So as we tear out sections of road, like right now, there's a piece of Walnut that's missing between Early and Edison. It was there a couple days ago. We've had to tear it out as we put it in the water line. It'll be reconstructed, rebuilt. ADS is paying for that work as part of these agreements. The last point in Exhibit 3, which is a different yet similar set of maps to the service area and the reimbursement area for water for the town. The red line represents the sewer area limits as far as the latecomer fee. The blue line represents the water infrastructure service limits for the area. So as new development happens within those areas, those would be the areas where those fees would be due. If there are any questions, I would be happy to work through them, but Phil negotiated this, so he would be happy to answer those questions.
I always have questions, but, so I should ask this before I struck, but I forgot. Now, the 24 million gallons you mentioned number is based on how many of those shells?
So the 24 million gallons represents existing use of Tech and Coat, existing use of the town, existing use of all the other industrial users that currently take water. The only one that doesn't take municipal water in the industrial park today is Alcogen, formerly Unifrax. It was developed before the water system was developed, so they have their own well and fire pumps and everything. It then accounts for SJEC Energy Center, all of GM's project Phase 1 and the projections of Phase 2, as well as all the AWS for SBN 100, which is north of GM, and SBN 200, which is south of State Road 2. So, and then there's still about 4 million gallons of flex of additional water to get us to the 24 million. So as we look at the max capacity of all of the use of all of that water, that gets us to that point plus 4 million gallons. So that could be for suppliers, for additional housing growth around the town, for commercial development, whatever else happens. We have about 4 million gallons of flex in that 24 million gallons.
And then, Phil, what, this section 7.7, could you kind of walk me through that? I'm not an attorney.
Oh, 7.7, what this is a survival paragraph, which means this agreement is terminated. Those specific sections listed there would survive the termination of the agreement. It's a common legal mechanism. So for instance, the indemnification where they've agreed to indemnify us, that will survive in the event this is terminated. And should something happen where a claim be made against the county, even though the agreement was terminated, we could still go to ADS and request the indemnification.
The monthly reports detailed in Exhibit 1, who are those provided to?
I'm sorry.
The monthly reports, who are they reporting to?
So they'll be prepared locally and then provided to AWS as part of the payment, so.
Okay.
So we'll have to submit all the invoices and everything with that monthly report on progress and everything.
Okay.
It's a good job for Frank. Frank will be, I mean, that will be his responsibility with all the other bill payment that happens, so.
A question, there is obviously a termination clause, 2.2, maybe it's for Phil. If it were terminated, what costs would we be left with? Would we have, because the town's included, these other groups are included, what would we need to complete and how would we, I mean, do we have an idea that we could pay for that?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. It was one of the major negotiation points. So should it be terminated, that would be in the event that ADS decides to back away from the project. There's obviously no plans that that's going to happen. But one of the negotiation points that we negotiated is that regardless of if they do back out, ADS under this agreement has agreed to reimburse those total reimbursements or amounts that are listed in Table 2.
Okay.
And in the event, should they back out of the project and perhaps sell the property or the project to another company, they will obtain guarantees from that additional company. And then further, to give more protection to the county and the redevelopment commission, ADS is guaranteeing those payments from that other entity. So the county is certainly protected in the event that that happens.
All right, thank you. I knew I could count on you.
Thanks.
further questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the ADS Water and Sewer Infrastructure Agreement?
Motion to approve?
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, again, no other questions. Mr. Garrett?
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Mr. Goble?
Aye.
Mr. Horvath?
Aye.
And Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, I'm going to be a lot less complicated than Mr. Shalio. I have a series of professional service agreements. The first one is for a appraisal by Iverson Grove for a property at 32551 State Road Highway 2 in New Carlisle. This is commonly known as Mini Mountain. Mr. Grove is going to appraise that property at a cost of $1,500. Any questions?
Should we approve these individually, Mr. Garrett?
We should approve them individually, yes.
Can we combine the two appraisals for a property or just do each one individually?
We could do the Mini Mountain approvals for Mr. Iverson Grove and Mr. Sante together, and then do a separate approval for the R&L Carrier properties.
Okay.
That would be fine.
So to introduce Mr. Santee's proposal, it's for the same property, and it is for the same price, $1,500.
Any questions? Is there a motion to approve the first two appraisals?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Mr. Garrett?
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Mr. Goble?
Aye.
Mr. Horvath?
Aye.
And Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, next on the agenda is a professional service proposal from Iverson Grove to appraise 30923 Fillmore Road in New Carlisle. This is for R&L Carriers. They are only appraising a portion of the property. This is for potential road improvement and a sanitary sewer extension. Mr. Grove's cost for that appraisal is $3,500. I will continue. That same property, for the same purposes of road improvements and sanitary sewer extension, Mr. Santee has offered to appraise that portion of that property for $2,500. Any questions?
Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Mr. Goble?
Aye.
Mr. Horvath?
Aye.
And Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Is Abby down there?
She was. Oh, in the back.
Where am I'm gonna make her do this next one.
Abby Wiles, Area Plan Commission Director. Before you is a proposal from JPR for a trail master plan, really a feasibility analysis for the greater New Carlisle and Indiana Enterprise Center area. We would like JPR to conduct feasibility analysis on a number of the proposed bike and pedestrian routes identified in New Carlisle's comprehensive plan, and examine how identified routes might connect with the Indiana Enterprise Center and also neighboring jurisdictions to the north and east, and other destinations within the greater New Carlisle area, such as our fantastic county parks. So this scope of work would cover feasibility analysis for a number of the connections identified in the plan, and on various, other identified connections through like MACOG's plans. And then the idea would be, once those preferred north, south, and east connections are identified, to come back with a second scope of work for 30% conceptual design of the preferred routes. This would include some public outreach, a couple of open houses, and then targeted outreach to companies within the IEC and other jurisdictions. So asking for your consideration and approval of this. It's very much in line with the IEC area management plan, as trails for bike and pedestrians were contemplated and discussed throughout the IEC plan. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I assume this will tie in with trails to Potato Creek, et cetera, or at least consider where those are going to be.
Yeah. Bill, I don't know if you have any comments about that, but that would probably be, yes,
I mean,
it's
it'd
looking
be
at regional
beyond the
connect.
scope of what you're doing, but we're at least aware of.
It'll ultimately tie into whether it's the Continental Divide Trail that's more in the Choco Dino World area, ultimately the Potato Creek area. So all of these, this is kind of next piece. We did, a couple years ago, we did kind of the Capitol Avenue corridor, pedestrian plan. So it's just one of the other pieces. At some point, probably in 2025, once the comp plan's done, we'll be back to talk about a regional or countywide trail plan. So these are sub-plans that ultimately feed into a larger trail plan, so.
Thank you.
So this trails topic is controversial for a lot of property owners. So it's kind of a chicken and egg discussion, so we're paying for a study to see where we can put trails and what they're gonna cost, things like that. At the end of the day, though, we still need property owners to agree to their property being used.
Correct.
So going into this, we know that we may not build certain trails because we can't get that permission.
So I would make the comment that a lot of the trails in this area have been vetted, whether it was through the town plan or through the IEC plan, to a point that we know we'll have a little bit better success with that. So I think this will help formalize some of that. So we know that there's a rezoning later today for some things along Timothy Road. These conversations will tie in with that property development. So trying to be a little more, less pie in the sky, a little bit more strategic and practical with this plan than maybe some of the others that have happened in the past.
Right, but the message to the property owners is, this is just a study.
Yes.
We're not gonna
Yes.
try and force, and we have no mechanism to force them through, right?
Correct.
So, okay. I just kinda wanna
Yep.
get ahead of that conversation.
Yep.
That's good. Any other comments or questions? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
If a motion and a second, Mr. Lane,
Aye.
Mr. Goble,
Aye.
Mr. Horvath,
Aye.
and Mr. Jordan.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next item is the Phase 2 Wellhead Protection 5-year Update Activities Plan with Peerless Midwest. So in your packet, you've got a copy of the proposal from Peerless Midwest. I will ask you to approve this subject to the proposal being made out to the Redevelopment Commission as opposed to the town. Just a minor technicality, but we want to make sure that that gets corrected. So as part of the water agreement we approved with the town earlier, one of the pieces, as we have been doing, the Redevelopment Commission, in coordination with the town, a series of studies on the aquifer and the new creation of the new water management plan as we convert the SJEC plant from a non-potable plant to a potable plant. Whole series of things have had to happen. The last piece of that, and this was in the agreement, I just overlooked it as we were talking about it, is the creation of a new wellhead protection area. So now you've got 2 water treatment plants that will both be potable water treatment plants. The existing potable water treatment plant has a wellhead protection area. The other water treatment plant doesn't because it presently isn't potable. When it becomes potable, it needs a wellhead protection area. Wellhead protection area is defined through a whole series of studies as far as 1-year time of travel, 5-year time of travel, and different metrics and things. We will be adding a number of new wells to the area, so those new wells have to be part of that study. So this proposal before you today, which is total amount not to exceed $20,500, will get us to that point where we have the wellhead protection in play, or wellhead protection area in place. So this will cover the existing wellhead protection area, do a minor update to that, and then this new area will be that level of documentation that needs to be done to do that. So this is really our last obligation from taking the water treatment plant from non-potable to potable as part of all of the agreements that we have with the town. So just need to get this approved so we can get that process started, please.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second, anyone?
Second.
We have a motion and a second, Mr. Lane,
Aye.
Mr. Goble,
Aye.
Mr. Horvath,
Aye.
and Mr. Jordan.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, there is the next item on the agenda. This is not, staff is not asking the commission to vote on this. This is more of an update. Has to do with the Wyatt Economic Development Area. When the 2024 budget was approved at the January 19th meeting, the Redevelopment Commission approved a line item of $50,000 to establish a fund that could be used by the residents of Wyatt. After the line item was approved, I met with the Madison Township Board of Trustees, shared with them the information that we had these funds available, and asked them how they wanted that money to be invested within their community. They voted and approved a 50% matching fund that could be used for exterior maintenance on a property, and they limited the grant to be $5,000. The reason we're bringing this to your attention is I'm happy to report that the first project was completed. And if you turn to the report, there is a list of the projects that the Board of Trustees have approved, and the project for tree removal and a fence installation was completed on the 16th of June. The landowners pay the deposit. Once the project is completed, the funds that the Board of Trustees were granted is then distributed to the contractor. If you have any questions about that program, and I wanted to share the reason we established the program is for two reasons. One, the TIF expires in 2029, and number two, there isn't a designated project for those funds to be used, so we felt it would be appropriate to use those funds for the citizens of Wyatt. Any questions?
No, thank you.
Good time to do this? Yep.
Next up is resolution number 2024-11, which is the confirming resolution for establishing the Northern Edge EDA. If you remember at the last meeting, you passed a declaratory that has also been passed by the Area Plan Commission and the council, and it is now back to you for a confirming resolution. This would establish 4 separate allocation areas within that Northern Edge EDA on the 933 corridor in Roseland. Happy to answer any questions you'd have on that.
What's the purpose of a confirming resolution?
It's just the next step to establish the EDA, so you have to pass both a declaratory and a confirming resolution.
Is this Mr. Facenda planning to speak on this?
I believe we have him and Mr. Gallmeyer from Buckingham Properties, so.
Okay.
We were gonna let Ryan speak first, but since Phil's at the podium already, we'll let Phil go, so.
Well, I wasn't sure what our order was going to be, so. Commissioners, Phil Facenda from Barnes & Dormer, 201 South Main Street, here as special counsel to the county with regard to the project. As was previously stated, the statutory procedure, I was going to correct one thing, it was the commissioners that approved, and not the council, but the commissioners did. As part of this process, after assuming the establishment of the area, the county will be moving forward. As I mentioned at your last meeting, the county will be moving forward with economic development revenue bonds that are all part of the incentive to Buckingham Properties to undertake this project. The county, I wanted to point out to you that the county is in negotiations with Buckingham on a development agreement, and that has been prepared, and both sides are negotiating that. Currently, the incentives that would come from this TIF are part of that development agreement and play a large role in the undertaking by the developer of the investment. I think, again, Ryan Gallmeyer from Buckingham could answer additional questions, but just broad overview, we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of a 370-unit multifamily development. There are 3 phases. That would be the first phase. The second phase is a 100 townhome development, and then the final phase is a senior living apartment-style facility. The total investment in these three phases is anticipated to be over $180 million. It is to be located just north of the Notre Dame campus. As Frank pointed out, the calendar. One additional point I wanted to mention, and I think we talked about this in the last meeting, was that of the available TIF, 85% of it will be pledged to the repayment of these bonds, which will be developer purchase bonds. 15% of it will be available to the County Redevelopment Commission to enhance and incentivize the development of property further north on 933, which would be the prior Holiday Inn property. And that is for a development that will exceed $5 million north and for available funds for infrastructure, et cetera. I'm happy to answer any questions. There is a public hearing that is part of this process.
Correct.
Thank you.
Good morning. Ryan Gallmeyer with Buckingham Properties. Appreciate the opportunity to answer any questions the commissioners may have.
Just refresh, the project is estimated to start at a certain date. Phase one would be done, and I believe you said phase 2 or 3 could be flipped. It's a little bit
Correct.
fluid after that.
Correct. So we anticipate breaking ground on the first phase, which is the larger development, 374 plus or minus multifamily units with over 12,000 square feet of commercial space by the end of the year. We anticipate even that phase will be a phased delivery. So phase 1A, if you will, would take approximately 24 months to construct. Phase 1B, approximately 30 months from the original construction start. We're anticipating that then the phase 2 would begin approximately 12 to 24 months after the first phase begins. And again, phase 3, 12 to 24 months after the second phase starts.
Okay. All right. Any questions?
If there's no further questions, Mr. President, now would be the time to open a public hearing. Individuals will have 3 minutes to comment.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone like to speak to the commission under the public hearing? Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jaron Killing. I'm the Fire Chief of the Clay Fire Territory. Our business address is 18355 Auten Road in South Bend. I'm here to speak to the Northern Edge Economic Development project. Certainly, our fire department is supportive of the progress that the project represents moving forward. The challenge that we have with that project being placed into a TIF is the impact that it's going to have, the negative impact that it's going to have on the delivery of our services. Based on the numbers that we just heard, we are expecting a 2 to 5% increase in demand for our services to that area once it's developed. And unfortunately, for the next 25 years, we're not going to be able to collect any of the additional revenue beyond our base when that project happens. The statutes in Indiana currently do provide provision for fire and EMS protection services. We're simply asking that moving forward in the consideration of the development of that TIF, that fire protection services be excluded from the TIF and that those monies continue to be allocated per our fire levy. If you have any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you now.
So you're saying this agreement doesn't allow for that?
It does not currently. The agreement that we have seen that the TIF district will keep those monies from fire protection. We'll continue to receive the base on our levy. We will not receive additional revenues to support the fire and EMS services to that facility or any of those facilities in the project when that happens for the next 25 years, which is going to have a significant impact on us. We know we're going to experience that significant impact up front. Over the course of the next 25 years, I can't predict what that impact is going to be for us.
How much are we talking initially?
We're anticipating a 2 to 5% increase based on similarly configured projects that we have in the community right now for residential multifamily units and then ECFs, extended care facilities, as they talked about being one of the projects that we're going to have there. Using numbers that we have in similarly configured properties around the area, we're anticipating an additional 2 to 5% increase initially. And I don't know what the rest of the project is going to look like with some of the other commercial impacts there. So I just had the obligation to share with you what our concerns are, and certainly would ask that the request from the fire department would be that our portion of that would be excluded from the TIF, as is allowed in the statute. Any additional questions for me? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to come to the podium and speak? Someone's online.
Yes, Steve Francis, Judy Lake Drive, North Clay Township. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I spoke at the declaratory resolution about this very topic in terms of TIF funds and TIF districts and taking money out that, on the appreciated values going forward, and how that needs to be tied to community benefits and needs. It does bother me to some extent that the declaratory resolution says it took into account, it takes into account comments made, have to be legitimate comments made at the public hearings and in the declaratory resolution. I don't think that has been done in this case, in lieu, obviously, in terms of other services that are needed, and there won't be funds when there are expanded needs for those services. Secondly, another matter up on the northern edge, I spoke about that sort of snake going up 933 to the Holiday Inn properties as being sort of tacked on in some way. Not, it's contiguous, I suppose, but I think that's a generous use of the term in terms of contiguous land in a TIF. I think you're shoehorning that in. Maybe there's a good reason for that. I'm not against it necessarily. However, in another matter on the Drainage Board, without a hearing, they reduced the easement or the distance from Jude Creek, which is a very prime creek in our county, very important conservation area in waters of the U.S., to 35 feet from 75 feet. Did not have a hearing on that. I'm concerned about the pressures on Jude Creek and on our conservation resources in the county upstream from Jude Creek in the Granger area. And in this case, I talked to the county surveyor about that problem, got nowhere with it, no concern by the Drainage Board. I would like to see that in a kind of development agreement, that there is more protection for Jude Creek from that particular proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have their hand up? No.
Seeing no other comments, Mr. President, now would be the time to close the public hearing and request a motion.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 2024-11?
Hold on one second. So my question is, are we able to grant the chief's request? Is now the time to look into that, or is that further down the line?
So I can tell you that when Clay Fire was established, the statute actually excludes their ability to recoup those TIF fees, is the way the statute is written, because their territory was established before the exception made within the statute. We can certainly have discussions through the development agreement process, but I can tell you statutorily, it's excluded.
TIF funds can still be used, but they have to be allocated by the TIF district.
We could certainly have those discussions. I'm just telling you, advising as to what the statute says.
I would be in favor of having those discussions, because as a Clay Township resident and a member of the board for Clay Township as well, I want to make sure that they're getting their share of what they need to do.
And again, the development agreement will come before you at a future date.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure that before I voted, that's what we were going to do.
Okay. Any other questions?
This is where I need to abstain. I need to abstain.
Okay. All right. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Lane?
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Mr. Goebel?
Aye.
Mr. Horvath?
Aye.
And Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0.
Now, I think we're going to talk about a housing study, if that's okay, under additional business. Frank, do you want to do a little introduction before we start sharing?
On the call today is Sharon Woods from Land Use USA. She prepared the residential target market analysis. We have full copies here for the board members when they're completed, and they are also online on our website for the public to see. Sharon will be walking you through a kind of like a 30,000-foot level of this report here, and then we'll be able to answer some questions for you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sharon Woods, and my address is East Michigan Avenue in the city of Lansing, Michigan. So I am a consultant and a market analyst, and I did complete the residential target market analysis for St. Joseph County. To clarify, we did focus on 4 townships: Olive, Warren, German, and Green. And I hope you can see my screen okay. Frank, can you give me a okay, verbal okay, that you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to zoom in real quick on this map that I'm showing. I do want to clarify that we ran 2 scenarios. Excuse me. Apologize for that. We ran 2 scenarios, and the conservative scenario focuses on basically growth and movership rates of in-migrating households as they kind of have stood for the last couple of years. So kind of, nothing changes significantly in the market, and we just continue growing and we continue having in-migration as before. Then we also ran an aggressive scenario, which assumes that at least 2 major employers open at the Indiana Enterprise Center and create a significant number of new good-paying jobs, and that there's an economic trickle-through benefit for the region in the creation of additional jobs through trickle-through businesses. So at least 2 good major employers with good paying jobs. And what I did is to figure out what that aggressive scenario would be, is I looked at growth rates and migration into each township, and then I applied a multiplier. So a multiplier of 4 for Olive Township, which is closest to the Enterprise Center, and then a multiplier of 3 for Green and German, which are a little further away. So it's kind of like a distance decay. And by the way, I think I have about 15 minutes on the agenda, so please bear with me. I have a lot of information that I want to try to cram into about 15 minutes. So the multiplier is just based on so basically it's saying if the existing growth rate, for example, for Olive Township was 1% annually, we're saying that under the aggressive scenario, maybe they could get to 4% growth annually. Or another example is for Green Township, perhaps in-migration was at a rate of 2% every year. A multiplier of 3 would say that now we're going to bump that up to 6%. So I did also apply a threshold where if any of these townships already had very aggressive high growth, for example, German Township, then even applying a multiplier of 3 to that aggressive scenario, I still only allowed the growth rate to hit to a certain level. So there was a ceiling that we applied, and that ceiling was based on a study of all townships in the Michiana area, but also Southwest Michigan. We looked at every township and tried to figure out what is the maximum that any township has ever achieved in the past, 4 years or so. So that's how we got to the aggressive scenario. We did play around with the idea of looking at what the potential major employers have reported as actual potential job growth. But those numbers seemed kind of volatile and fluid and a little inconsistent, and we had a hard time getting our arms around that. So we felt that this was a more documentable and reliable and probably smarter, methodological, and politically safer route to go. So the next slide that I would like to show is, I'm going to show you, I'd like to show you 3 geographies and then talk about the city of South Bend as well. So I'm going to start with New Carlisle, and then we'll talk about German Township quickly, and then we'll look at the county, and then talk about South Bend as well. I did not run the numbers for South Bend, but I think it's a major player here, just because of the sheer size and the downtown that they have. So for New Carlisle, if you do get your hands on a copy of the full study and want to spend some time looking at it, these are the most important slides, the slides that look like this. I will zoom in for you as I talk a little bit to hopefully make it easier. I'm going to start with the top chart. So the next minute or so, I'm just going to explain how to read these slides because they're so important. And so the way to read this is, first of all, the title, it's annual market potential. So this is a 1-year snapshot. It is the market potential. And this is the town of New Carlisle. And it is captured with new build residential units for the year 2025, a 1-year snapshot. I will clarify that this data is good for at least 5 years. And if nothing significant changes in the market economically, then it could be good for 10 years. But, you know, I think many of us are hoping that there are significant changes and that after 5 years, we've seen some growth and that maybe you could consider at that time updating the numbers just to see what, you know, how things have changed. In this paragraph here, it does show that this is the aggressive or growth scenario. So again, this reflects the multiply. It has been layered in. And the numbers are not huge. I'm going to jump real quick and make sure that so I'm going to go back to this aggressive scenario here. So this paragraph in the middle of the page is intended to just kind of help anybody, Abby or Frank or any of you, try to explain the numbers to another person. So both charts on this page represent oops, this is, I have a typo in here. I just realized I need to fix that. It represents an aggressive market potential based on in-migration with a multiplier effect. So based on the analysis, if all of these jobs are created, then the town by itself, without the township, could develop 55 new for sale residential units for buyers and owners each year for the next 5 years. In addition, they could build 170 units for renters each year. So that's like building 2 fairly good sized apartment buildings, or 55 houses or 55 cottages, for example. This lower chart is equally important. So if we take 170 plus 55, that's 225. And the lower chart is the same number of households, the same market potential. But what I did is I broke it down a little bit more. So these are the owners, and to the right are the renters. And I'm basically wanting to demonstrate that although there's 55 new owners that would be in migrating and that we could support 55 new residential units, that 50 of them would actually look for a house or a large cottage or something with a private yard. But 5 would actually be willing to trade or be converted into a townhouse, preferably something that's side by side, still has a private entrance, a fairly large, nice-sized porch, and perhaps a vista view of something. That vista view could be of the downtown district, some nightlife, or perhaps the beautiful countryside surrounding, you know, the community. On the renters, of those 170 renters, this is just breaking them down a little bit more. It's interesting that actually only 65 of those 170 renters would be inclined to choose a loft or an apartment in a building that looks like a walk-up or courtyard apartments. These are kind of missing middle typology nomenclature that I'm using. So it's something, it's not just another apartment building, which I think the town is adverse to. Is what I've heard from the stakeholders. You know, they don't want just more apartment buildings. And honestly, that's not what the migrating households really want either. They're more inclined to choose a small, urban style walk-up building, which is basically 4 lofts on each of 3 levels, where each loft has light coming in on windows on 2 sides. Still sharing a main entrance at the beginning, but the setback is more intimate and it's more of an urban format. Then 15 would be willing to choose a townhouse, but again, I do believe they need to be side by side, maybe a small porch with some sort of a glimpse. And believe it or not, well, you might not be surprised, of those 170 renters, 90 of them would actually be more inclined to rent a house or a subdivided house, or there are buildings that we can build now that we've always been able to build, but we're recommending, it looks like a house, but it's actually designed and built to be for apartments, for example, or even accessory dwellings or small cottages. So that's really the culture and the setting and the small town quality of life. These are not heavy urbanites. They do not really want to be packed into apartments, and I don't believe we should build apartments. So those charts are important. And then I also have the conservative scenario. The numbers are far smaller. So on the conservative scenario, we have 15 owners. So really, we're only recommending that you build in the town of New Carlisle. If none of these employers actually open, it would be 15 houses each year that the town could build, and 20 apartment buildings or lofts over street front retail in the downtown, and still 5 townhouses, but still 20 want to be in something that's more detached and a private entrance with a little bit of their own yard in a place. You know, the culture is that they really are going to want. I will say, especially if we have new jobs with major new employers, that these households, you know, they want to have at least a 1-car garage and a place to put up a grill and to have a dog and play their radio. And that's kind of the privacy that they want. That's why they don't want to be packed into apartments. So I'm going to real quickly shift now my second geography. The rest of this will go much faster because that was a focus on how to read these exhibits, really. I want to show you how German Township looks. So German Township, we have the aggressive scenario. The numbers are much bigger. And again, I need to fix my paragraph in here, but basically 190 home buyers could be migrating and looking for new choices to buy in German Township under the aggressive and growth scenario, and almost 600 renters. So again, the charts are very similar, and here you can see again, really of those 600 renters, you know, more than half of them are looking for something other than an apartment. But now the numbers bump up quite a bit in townhouses. In German Township, we're getting closer to kind of an urban setting, potentially, or, you know, gradually urbanizing. And more, these migrating renters are more likely to tolerate something like a townhouse. And only 1/5 or 1/6 of them would even choose more of an urban format, you know, lofts or walk-up buildings or apartments. A courtyard apartment is, you know, preferably the apartments wrap around a shared courtyard. It's not just apartments overlooking parking lots. It's something more on the missing middle housing spectrum. So German Township, the interesting thing is that even though the multiplier was lower here, it was only 3, the difference between the aggressive and the conservative scenario is significant. And a big part of the reason is that the growth, just the potential for growth there is so significant. This is the conservative scenario, and this is the aggressive. So applying a multiplier of 3 to even a modest growth rate is it doesn't hit the ceiling, so that multiplier is allowed to be fully applied. And the growth, the potential growth for this township, even though it's further away from the Indiana Enterprise Center, it's still going to significantly benefit. And so real quickly, we also ran the numbers for Green Township and for Warren. But just in the interest of time, I want to share with you that I also did the numbers for the entire county. And the numbers are quite significant. So here is the aggressive scenario, and then here's the conservative. So I'm just kind of watching these numbers pop. You know, here's the aggressive and here's the conservative. So there's a bump definitely with the IEC, but I want to share with you, you know, as an analyst, I'm not even under the aggressive scenario. You know, I'm usually pragmatic and conservative and realistic. I don't like to cast blue sky scenarios. So I kept it realistic, and I didn't try to pad the numbers or inflate it. I do want to share with you, so let me see, I'm just going to share my screen real quickly. This is the last thing I want to do, is just talk briefly about the city of South Bend, because we didn't run the numbers for South Bend. But I think it's important to just kind of acknowledge that the city is so much significantly larger than any of these 4 townships. And it also has what I would call really a fabulous and reemerging and transforming downtown with many recreational and entertainment resources and opportunities, you know, just choices, everything from fitness centers to theaters and places to shop, you know, nightlife, restaurants, you know, having an airport nearby and a major university and sports, you know, to have the sports that come out of that major university. There's going to be a gravity pull. It's the gravity model of geography. You know, when we do market analysis, you know, I'm looking at South Bend, and I absolutely know that for migrating households inclined to transition their household into the region because they want to fill a job at these major new employers, particularly the singles, I believe, and particularly renters, are going to gravitate to the city of South Bend because of all the amenities. And again, it's a bit of a lifestyle choice. I'm single, I'm more likely to be young, although not necessarily. There are singles of all ages, singles of all incomes, and of all walks of life. But when you're single, there's an inclination to want to seek opportunities to feel socially connected, and you get that in urban places. So there's going to be a gravity pull, and the sheer size of South Bend is going to pull many of those renters into the city. On the antithesis is that, well, families, 2 wage earners with children, might be more inclined to seek, you know, a small town quality of life. But the town of New Carlisle just doesn't have the gravity pull to gobble up a massive share of the new in-migrating households. So many of those households are actually going to choose other places. Some might actually go to LaPorte, or they might go to Green Township, or they might end up actually, a few might go to the city of South Bend. They may even go up to, they may go into Granger, for example, where many luxury, more larger homes are being built. So I want to just be careful and clarifying that, you know, maybe you saw the numbers for New Carlisle. There wasn't a big bump, a big jump, and it's simply the sheer small size of the community today limits its ability to have that gravity pull. And many of these households could go to many other places. They could even go to Niles, for example. That would be a long commute, but they're going to scatter a bit. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would like to invite you to ask me any questions. I'd be happy to do my best to answer.
I would note, we do have copies of the presentation and the other materials, and they have been posted on the county's website, both under the Economic Development tab as well as the Planning and Zoning tab. So it's all available
And
electronic.
there will be a public presentation, because I think we'd have more questions once we've gone through the material, and you have a chance to digest it a little bit, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right. We're now to the public comment section. If anyone would like to come to the podium and speak, you're limited to 3 minutes, and please give us your name and address. Seeing none in person, is Mr. Francis have his hand still up, or is that new?
No, sorry, I didn't lower it.
Okay, all right,
You can adjourn.
okay. Thank you. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second?
Motion and second, Mr. Lane,
Aye.
Mr. Goble,
Aye.
Mr. Horvath,
Aye.
Mr. Jordan.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
I'm running. I've had it.
We lost Dan.
Recording stopped.
Blue is just me? Okay.